Welcome to Enchanted Astrology with Ariel Smith. Thank you so much for joining me as we look at the astrological forecast for the week of March 11th to March 17th. Now, over this week, we have an ongoing conjunction with Mars, the North Node, and Mercury in Pisces, all squaring Black Moon Lilith in Sagittarius over the course of this week, and I'm seeing this as a fated closing out of an old perception or an old way of moving through the world. And because this is happening in Pisces, it can be very subtle. So it can be much more of an internal or spiritual or emotional type of a realization and understanding. And so Mercury retrograde is right here in the middle of it all, taking us on this journey of revisiting what we thought we knew about ourselves and about the world around us. So to me, this Mercury retrograde in Pisces feels like looking at one of those optical illusion images. Those, you know them, you first look at it, you're completely convinced that you see a certain image. Maybe you see a vase, maybe you see two faces, but when you take a closer look, the image changes right before your eyes. So what you thought you saw wasn't actually there. And that's exactly what this Mercury retrograde journey feels like. We're being asked to look again, to take a second look at the stories, at the assumptions and the narratives that we've built our entire reality on. And that can be deeply destabilizing. So when this kind of a realization happens on a small scale in our personal lives, it can already feel disorientating, right? But when it happens on a collective level, when cultural narratives start to unravel and the darker underbelly of society becomes visible, it can just be plain overwhelming. Because once we see the dysfunction, once we're able to recognize how unhealthy or even disturbing something is, we're left asking, now what? Now what? What do we do with that information, right? Where do we go from here? And it can feel like if the foundation was built on an illusion, then making a change means tearing down the entire structure of our lives. And that just seems terrifying. But the realizations happening here are not trivial. So this isn't like discovering that, oh, I should be eating oatmeal because that's healthier than cereal, so I need to make that change. Or it's not like reading the ingredients on your favorite cottage cheese and realize there's polysorbate 80 in there and now you need to switch brands. So those are just adjustments, and this energy is much deeper because it is systemic. And part of the reason it feels so big is because we now have this energy entering the zodiac with Neptune and Saturn moving into Aries. And Aries can act like a spark where it ignites something that was previously sitting in just a potential state for a long time. Aries is that energy that finally says, okay, something has to happen now to change the state, right? So while Mercury retrograde in Pisces is helping us to unravel the illusion in order to see it clearly, the Aries energy is beginning to spark the courage to do something about it. So Mercury is unwinding our assumptions about what it means to do the right thing. And many of us have been taught that, well, if we just simply follow the rules if we stay within the expectations of the system, then we are doing what's right, right? And if something goes wrong within that system, well, that's simply not our problem. It's just how things work, right? That's the narrative. But history shows us that systems are never neutral. And sometimes the most painful lessons come when we realize how, in fact, just ordinary people can become participants in extremely harmful systems without fully realizing it. So a really difficult example of this is what happened during World War II. So during the Nuremberg trials, one phrase came up again and again from people who had participated in the machinery of that war, and they said, "I was just following orders." Now, obviously, responsibility existed at many levels. So, obviously Adolf Hitler played a central role in initiating and directing unimaginable atrocities. But genocide on that scale could never be carried out by one person alone. It actually requires the involvement of thousands or even millions of people participating in a system around him, right? The people who operated the trains, the people who guarded the camps, the people who enforced orders, and the people who looked the other way. Now, I'm not making claims about what individuals could or should have done differently. Obviously, many were operating under threats to themselves or their families, and these extreme situations most of us can, barely imagine having to face. But what history reveals is something really important, because large-scale harm almost always emerges from participating in systems and not from just one individual. And when we look closely enough, we can see how everyday people can become deeply indoctrinated into those systems. So Mercury retrograde in Pisces helps us to step back and to see those patterns more clearly, with more awareness, because awareness opens the door to empathy, and to empathy specifically for the people who are suffering under those systems. And historically, it's very often vulnerable populations who bear the greatest cost. And the illusion within many systems is that, well, those populations are the problem. That's the indoctrination message that the people would receive, right? But Pisces wisdom shares with us the bigger picture. And I believe here it is inviting us to recognize how systems often extract from those most vulnerable, while at the same time framing the vulnerable as the cause of the issue. And when we can truly see that, when our human capacity for compassion and empathy becomes activated, right? It becomes very difficult to continue participating in those systems. So again, we come to the question, now what? I can see it, but now what do I do? And this is where Mars can come in to help. So Mars conjunct the North Node can bring about fated developments that can push us toward action. So it can sort of force us to have to take an action. It can also bring a sense of courage. It can bring motivation and a sense that we can start to forge a new path forward. So If Aries is the spark, Mars is sort of the match that you use to strike the spark. So something here is being ignited. In Pisces, it's inside of us. So it can be a sense that movement is necessary. And it can be developments that drive us into movement. And we also have supportive energy coming from Jupiter, which has recently just stationed direct at 15 degrees of Cancer. And Jupiter now begins expanding our emotional understanding of what we've been through. Cancer energy is about belonging. It's about family, community, right? Our sense of being in a tribe. And Jupiter here asks us to expand our idea of who belongs in that tribe. What is our sense of tribe now? So, as an example, right now, the World Baseball Classic is happening, and it's actually a beautiful example of this because in Major League Baseball, players often think of their team as their tribe, right? But during this tournament, that sense of tribe expands to include their entire country. Players who are normally teammates can end up on opposite teams. And when you watch the interactions between the countries and the teams, there are hugs, there are smiles, there's a huge amount of respect being on display, at least from what I've seen personally. And it's incredibly heartwarming because it shows just how easily our sense of belonging can expand, right? From local communities to provinces to nations and to humanity as a whole. And that's the kind of expansion that Jupiter in Cancer can bring. And it can remind us that human connection often flourishes outside of rigid systems. Because when you go back into the system of Major League Baseball, into hyper monetized and extractive systems, you start seeing competition and conflict and disconnection. Outside of those systems, you see this beautiful, heartwarming, expanded sense of just human connection. Now on March 14th, Mars forms that exact square with Black Moon Lilith in Sagittarius. And this can be where some tension shows up because Black Moon Lilith represents parts of our psyche that have been suppressed or pushed into the shadows. So these are things like rage, autonomy, truth that will just refuse to stay buried, because Lilith is the pain that forces us to finally look at something we've been avoiding. It's like a wound that has become infected, right? That infection, that pain becomes impossible to ignore. Eventually, we just have to go to the doctor and open it up and see what's going on. And that's Lilith. So with Lilith in Sagittarius right now, the wound, the infection being exposed is relating to our ideologies. And ideologies shape the world we build, right? What we believe determines the political structures we build, our economic systems, our hierarchy of values. So our beliefs about wealth, morality, gender roles, family structures, spirituality. Basically, our ideologies are the foundation of our global systems. So as Lilith moves through Sagittarius, she is exposing where those belief systems have become distorted or harmful, and when Mars and Mercury square Lilith this week, our new realizations come into conflict with the ideologies that we've inherited. And that can bring up powerful emotions, right? That can bring up rage and grief and resentment. But pain is giving us information. So pain is telling us that something needs attention, something is infected, and something needs healing. Now, finally, as we reach March 17th, Mercury forms an exact conjunction with the North Node, where he will stand still before stationing direct on March 20th. But on the 17th, the moon will also be there, which will join Mercury, Mars, and the North Node in Pisces. And all of this energy continues to square Black Moon Lilith in Sagittarius. So there may be something revealed here that carries deep emotional weight. Something that brings up very strong feelings, possibly anger, possibly grief, possibly a realization that things just can't continue the way they have been. But because all of this is happening in Pisces, this experience may be very internal. So it may feel like a very powerful realization within yourself. Maybe you don't know how to talk about it yet. Maybe you just can't think about things the same way anymore. Maybe you feel you just can't move through the world the same way anymore. And sometimes that moment of anger or repulsion to something is actually the spark that initiates change, because sometimes we need a spark or some momentum to get us on the path moving forward, or get us on a path going in a different direction. So if you're feeling strong emotions this week, if something is stirring within you, it may actually be serving this higher purpose. I would say very likely is, with all of this energy conjunct with the North Node. It may be guiding you toward a path that is more aligned with your truth. And that is ultimately the intention of this Mars North Node energy, right? To ultimately move us forward. So I hope this forecast resonates with what you may be experiencing, or even provides some validation for what you are moving through right now. And if you would like guidance on your own birth chart and what the energies of this year mean for you personally, I am currently accepting new clients. So you can book a consultation through enchantedastrology.ca. These are live sessions over Teams where we explore your chart in depth and talk about how current planetary cycles are unfolding specifically in your life. Now, thank you so much for joining me today. And as always, I will be back next week with another episode. Take care, and I'll see you then.